issues. We resolved most of them, but today without video, but good audio. Graham Penrose in the show. Welcome to Bitcoin Live.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
It's a pleasure. We're going to have a very interesting conversation about a lot of different topics. One of them, of course, being the anti-hate speech laws being pushed forward in Ireland. But we're also going to talk about technology. We're going to talk a little bit about crypto, Bitcoin. We're going to talk about a ton of other things. But before we do that, can you sort of introduce yourself to the audience who might not know you yet?
Sure, Nicholas. My name is Graham Penrose. I'm originally from Ireland, Dublin, North Dublin City. I am an owner of a private military security company called TMG Corporate Services. My background in academia is a primary degree in computer science from Trinity College in Dublin, the executive program for artificial intelligence in the Saïd Business School, the University of Oxford, and a postgrad in criminology from Dublin Business School, specialising in counter-terrorism, counter trafficking and anti-human trafficking. I'm 55, which I turned on the 18th of June. I spent 35 years in a variety of sectors. I've had 3 exits to date, a diversified real estate portfolio, commercial and residential units when I was in my 20s, a 4th generation logistics platform, which built in the early 90s and sold to Modus Media International. And the 3rd exit, I'll just say, was related to the defense industry. My family is 9th generation Dublin. Before that, that's my paternal family, Penrose. Before that, we were in the Wicklow Mountains as contraband smugglers during the 1700s. And before that, we landed in Cork as Quakers fleeing persecution in Britain. Penrose is a Norse-Norman name, originating from the Nordics and then Brittany and Normandy in the north of France. It had a prefix back in the old days, de, like de Burg de Penros. It means head of the heath. My people signed the Doomsday Book, which was William the Conqueror's or William I's tax audit of his kingdom. One of my ancestors is the signatory of the Magna Carta. My main focus over the last 15 years in the technology space has been the defense of privacy, civil liberties, and the calling out of the erosion of sovereignty, autonomy, and agency by the egregiously unregulated techno dictatorships of Silicon Valley. And now, in the age of AI, my concerns are that they are migrating their hegemony from Web 2 to Web 3. My interest in free speech we can speak about later with respect to my stand here at Aris and Uachtaráin against the anti-free speech law here, which is part of a concerted lawfare against the citizens of Ireland in order to which our politicians are puppets for, emanating from the WEF, the WHO, the EU unelected commission, and the United Nations, and now also NATO, who currently we have a Dame of the British Empire presiding over the future of our neutrality, which is something that we've preserved ever since we became independent, in air quotes, in 1922, after the War of Independence with the British. It's an empire on our doorstep, one of the first to do that after the Americans 200 years previously. But we were right on their doorstep. We've been entertained to centuries of horrific abuse, 3 genocides, which are unrecognized in the form of the Elizabethan, the Cromwellian, and the Malthusian food removal. Our population in 1829 was 11 million. By 1851, it was 4. These things are genocides, but even our own establishment doesn't teach it in school. I'm a proponent of free speech, and I am apolitical. I am not here in defense of any ideology. I'm in defense here. I'm sitting here in defense of the inalienable right of every citizen of every functioning democracy to have the right to free speech.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. Notorious background. I would say a positive one. Can you check your sound a little bit because it was there was a sort of noise on it. But
Is it the wind? There's a pretty heavy wind after blowing up here, or
yeah,
is it?
that might be it.
I'm
It's
trying.
now better again.
Yeah, I'm trying to move as the wind changes direction. So let me know throughout the conversation, and I'll attempt to correct it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's crystal clear now. Yeah.
Okay.
So you with a background like that, you're quite notorious, like I said.
Hmm.
You mentioned somewhere that you're hated by both the left and the right. Can you sort of expand on that a little bit?
Well, when I say I'm hated, I mean both the left and the right, and people who associate themselves with the left and the right and the centre. Um, um, do not support the stand because I will not make it a political stand. Um, but also, there is an extreme element, obviously, on both um, poles of those particular ideologies, the left and the right. And I've been entertained to death threats, posts on Twitter that I am an agent of a foreign intelligence service and have been trying to supply money and weapons in order to destabilize their movements, such that they call them. Um, so I would say the numbers that have shown up here are an indication of two things. So I've had 9 individuals join me over the course of 60 hours over the last 10 days. It's not because people don't know. I've had multiple political parties come to me and say, we would like to come down, but we want to bring our slogans, we want to bring our ideologies, and we want to bring our flags.
Hmm.
To which I said, this is an apolitical stance. The single unifying factor that our government has handed us in its despotism that can unify and unite everybody, regardless of political persuasion, ethnicity, race, gender, or life choice. And that I am seeking for people to look past the disunity, the disharmony, to look past the negativity of the civil discourse, which is protest this and anti that, and simply, passively, with humility and peacefully, without agenda, stand united, even in our different opinions, for the right to discuss those opinions together without the fear of criminalisation through this anti-free speech bill. It doesn't seem like people are willing to do that, unfortunately. Um, I understood this to be a unifying factor, and I explained to the people who are on the right side of it now, the people who are being protected, that they are only on the right side of it now until somebody is elected who is not their friend, who weaponizes it against them, as they will do in an act of triumphal vengeance, I would imagine. When you try to legislate for offence, hurt feelings, and to legislate so aggressively, such as the ability under an anonymous phone call to have people, the form of the police force, break into your home, take all your digital devices and those of everybody present, demand the passwords, and if you possess a picture, just one picture that you've never published, that causes offence, say for example you took a picture of a holy book, but with something in the background that somebody may find is hurting their feelings while it is also present in the same picture, even without malice, that is considered to be hate speech, and you will be charged with a hate crime based on the subjective opinion of the complainant. So
Yeah.
it is a thing that we're seeing a lot of in Western society, which is the subjectivization of emotions into statute, and it's called for the common good. But repeatedly, I think anybody with a knowledge of those people who've ever used the phrase common good, it's not the majority that use it, it's the ruling classes, and it's used to centralize their power even further using the emotions of the people who don't understand how societies function. And it is doing very well here because the level of interest in this stand for free speech, I would say, is a direct reflection of the apathy, disinterest, and the surrender of freedoms for convenience, entertainment, and the protection from perceived fears. And the fact also that most people are wage slaves who have to get up in the dark hours and return in the dark hours and try and spend some time with their families and they are also afraid because many in this country work directly or indirectly for government-owned bureaucracies. And as a small nation of 5 million, we have 35,900 NGOs funded by our government to the tune of 6 billion. The NGOs are invited to every consultative group. We are not the citizens.
So basically, Ireland has been taken over.
Well, I don't want to use that word "taken over" because it's a dog whistle to some people's statements that I don't agree with. What I would say is that Ireland is a sandbox or a testing ground for ideologies, and has been for about 3 decades. And if we lose free speech here, the right to the right to assembly, the right to privacy, because the roll call of honour of our Justice Minister since the start of the year is the removal of free speech, through the Stalking Act, the removing of the right to assembly, through the Data Retention Act Amendment Act, the retention of all our data, through the new bill FRT, facial recognition technology, the introduction of edge analytics, mass surveillance devices to profile people facially and with gait and posture detection. This morning has been followed by a new government agency that has been set up to police online hate speech. The woman declared that she was appointed 3 months ago. She's 31 employees. She's looking for 145 more, and that they will find and root out anybody who hurts the feelings of anybody online. Now, if that isn't an agenda for authoritarianism, then I don't know what is. So I won't say taken over. I will say that our democracy is no longer a democracy, and that is a trend in Western Europe. And if we lose in Ireland, where nobody seems to be taking any interest, by the sound bites from Elon Musk, Donald Trump Jr., and various others when the bill was first announced, and Jordan Peterson and others. I've written to every one of them to help amplify this message. No answers. And anyway, they're only sound bites from talking heads who are paid to comment and not paid to take action.
So to pick up that last point, why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we're entertained to a bunch of people who consider themselves to be independent media and independent commentators. Joe Rogan, for example. Why doesn't Joe Rogan? I'm not doing this because I want to be a leader of a party. I'm not doing this because I want to hold a position of power or be elected as a member of our parliament, which is called Dáil Éireann, and the members of parliament are called Seach Dála. Why doesn't somebody like Joe Rogan take an interest in the first Western democracy to outlaw free speech, but not just to outlaw it, to do so with such punitive penalties that it drew the attention of the world? Why isn't Jordan Peterson interested in that? And I think it's highly ironic that a week after I wrote to him, he was banned off YouTube for hate speech.
Yeah.
So, haha, Mr. Peterson. You know, I mean, people are very fond in this world of having sound bites as people worship the cult of the personality, but nobody gets up and moves from their phone screens. We have turned into an observer culture where, as somebody is being attacked in the streets, people will video it rather than assist the person.
Yeah. I think we often talk about it also on this channel, that one of those core virtues that has been sort of lost or nobody's talking about is courage, right? It's like one of those virtues that has totally been submerged and not talked about anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about virtues for a second. When you think about virtues and societal constructs, I mean, why do we arrange ourselves in societies, or why had we done in the past? We don't do so in order to be against anyone. We do so because a group of people who share a common set of belief systems, a common idea of community, a love of their nation, a love of their heritage and their culture, group together in unison around a social contract of acceptable behaviors with an inherent moral compass. And that inherent...
You still there? I just lost your audio, Graham, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Are you still there?
Yeah, you're back. Yeah.
So I don't know what the last thing you heard was.
The moral compass.
Yeah, so the moral compass in a society of people with shared values and a communal interest and an interest in the well-being of their young, their adults and their elders does not need to be legislated for, because it's a society in harmony. It's a society defined by people feeling safe, people feeling happy, and people feeling contented in a society where everybody is subscribing to a similar value system. Um, the reason we have so much disunity in society is that agendas have pushed this concepts upon us without defining the terms exactly in terms of the nomenclature, and also without defining the outcomes that have occurred previously in those particular experiments that we tried in countries. So, for example, we separated church and state in most Western European democracies a long time ago in order to have secular democracy and the right for people to worship whichever religion they wanted to without the state mandating that there was a state religion. And that was a good thing. However, in Western Europe recently, we have an inequality of secularism, where for some reason you have to legislate now for the religions and belief systems that are counterintuitive to the Judeo-Christian belief systems of Western Europe, while the Judeo-Christian systems are constantly removed from the narrative. Now, I'm not a religious person, but one of the things in a functioning democracy should be equality of secularism. In other words, no religious discourse has any part to play in any democratic society. Therefore, once you start to legislate for protected categories, you have inherently created the religion, not church, but the religion state paradigm again, but this time by the protection of minorities. Now, that's bad news, because when you legislate for belief systems, you're legislating again for subjectivity.
Yeah.
And when you legislate for subjectivity, that's in the eye of the beholder. And when it's in the eye of the beholder, the decision is never consistent and can vary from minute to minute.
Yeah, and it's very easily manipulated and leveraged for ulterior purposes.
Agreed. I mean, we've seen again and again throughout history where people have legislation for subjectivism. And it has not worked out well for the groups that they legislated for and the groups that they legislated against. So once again, I'd like to really underline the fact that this is not a political statement of any dogma or ideology. This is the problem, that history is a wheel in the way humans behave. We keep doing the same things in different clothes, just with more sophisticated technologies. And the perception of history. Without history, there is no memory, and without memory, there is no future. We're doomed to repeat the same mistakes, just in a slightly different way.
I'm losing you a little bit, Graham.
Yeah, there's. I'll tell you what's happening. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah. Now it's fine again.
Yeah. What's happening is that the two locations I'm sitting between are the Uachtaráin na hÉireann, who's president of Ireland's residence in the Phoenix Park, which is called Oras an Uachtaráin, or House of the President. It was previously called the Viceregal Lodge, where the Lord Lieutenant of the British Empire sat here in control over Ireland. They have listening devices and blockers in place there. And then I'm also between that and the residence of the US Ambassador to Ireland, who resides in the Phoenix Park also, which is in Gaelic Park an Fuinishka, which means Park of the Clearer Still Water. And because the Anglicized or the English couldn't pronounce that, Fuinishka sounded like Phoenix, so they changed the name to Phoenix. It's the largest walled garden in Europe, 1,600 acres with a deer herd going back 400 years. It's a private hunting lodge of the kings and queens of Britain until 1922. That's the reason we're losing audio, is because intermittently my signal's being captured by the IMSI catchers or the stingrays that are sitting around me.
And probably also some wind.
And some wind.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this ties also into your book. I think it's a book, right, that you're writing, The First Cognitive Devolution. I mean, all these things that you're mentioning, like the subjectivism that's taking hold of society, or you could argue that it's being pushed upon us, but the lawfare, the entertainment industry, the sound bites, people doing the red wheel work, 9 to 5, sleep, turn on the TV. I mean, I guess these are sort of the things that you're sort of thinking about, or is it bigger?
Well, I mean, let's start to touch on what that thesis is around. There's two books in work in progress. One is the first Cognitive Devolution, and the second is AI dash artificially indoctrinated. Now, the idea, the thesis that I posit in both of them, but in a different way, is that let's talk about what cognitive devolution means. This period of Web3, blockchain, artificial intelligence, or more correctly, big data with machine learning, with a backdrop of 15 years of completely unregulated social media, is being lauded as a new paradigm of freedom. It's also been lauded as the fourth industrial revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a different view on that. There were three industrial revolutions. Each of them involved the creation of tools and elements outside of ourselves to assist us in doing things quicker, faster, better, or with specialization. However, I do not believe this is the fourth industrial revolution, because to say that suggests that it resides outside of the body of the human.
Yeah.
And in the case of artificial intelligence, neuroscience, haptic feedback devices, human computer interfaces, brain computer interfaces, such as the one everybody's most familiar with, like Neurolink, and the fact that we spend more time in our heads now than any other period of time, and that we spend more time interfacing with engines which push our thought processes down a particular rabbit hole via the recommendation engines and even the most simplistic recommendation engines of social media, that it is not a tool that is assisting us. It is a tool that is changing us. And if the last 20 years is anything to go by, it has removed a lot of what would be considered exploratory tasks in the developmental years of children, experimentations in nature, experimentations with science kits, experimentations with their parents who have plenty of time, or in previous days did, to spend time with them, to pick up on social cues, to understand how to negotiate in the playground by active play, and to develop your social coping skills by being out and about. However, more and more people are being drawn into the digital landscape with notionally parallel technologies, such as the recent release of the developer-only Apple Vision Pro, Fitbits, which are monitoring your physiological feedback, the previous Vision Pro, your pupil dilation, your footprints and your breadcrumbs on social media have been demonstrably shown how useful they are to nefarious through the use of probably 1/1 billionth of the data Google has on us by Cambridge Analytica via the Apple, or via the permissions error in the Facebook app that Kazdan released, which was a psychographic profiling app. Now, psychographic profiling has been around forever, but it involved someone sitting down and filling out hundreds of pages of questions. Kazdan created an app that could do that as a fun game on social media by analyzing likes and dislikes and who you followed and the comments you made. And even with that tiny sliver of data, was able to, with a high degree of accuracy, determine your orientations towards ethnicity, gender, race issues, politics, and so on, to such an extent that a US based billionaire bought his app and turned it into Cambridge Analytica under Alexander Nix. Now, that's only a civilian tip of the iceberg of what the tech behemoths have, and it's only a tip of the iceberg of what the government and militarized aspects of our societies have in terms of controllability. And regardless of what people think, the human species is an incredibly suggestive animal, and the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious have been the subject of research at scale for almost 7 decades. And the first actual written article was in 1913 in Eastern Europe. I'd invite people to go to Dr. James Giordano's speech at West Point to the cadets there in 1919 regarding neuropharmacology, neurostimulation, and brain-computer interfaces. It was hosted by the Modern War Institute, and the topic was the human brain, the battlescape of the 21st century. This talks about covert and overt manipulations of emotions and brain function. And as he was
in 1919.
1990 or 2019, you'll find it if Giordano is Giordano. You can't miss the guy. He's all over YouTube, and his list of work for three-letter agencies and governments is extensive. It's the Institute of Modern War. It's the brain is the battlescape of the 21st century, and it was at West Point to cadets. Now, I think it's interesting after the cadet at the lectern who gave a very long and pretty awfully delivered introduction for Dr. Giordano. As Giordano stood from his seat to approach the lectern and was applauded, he turned and said, "No, please don't applaud me." He said, "Too much performance pressure." But he said, more importantly, applaud me at the end. But he said, preferably, instead of applause, I would like to hear the slamming shut of your sphincters with fear. So if you go and have a look at that and the area of neuroscience, which Giordano is very proud of the fact that he's only 40 years old, and he's in it 38 years. He's also an advisor to the European Union's Human Brain Project, which very few people know about, which oxymoronically is located in Switzerland.
Yeah, that was a project by Barack Obama, right? Or at least the Brain Initiative.
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah.
Now, people can check out the ethical problems that has had. More importantly, for things that people know about in every day, Elon Musk's Neurolink got FDA approved for human trials last month. It got approved even.
I lost you. Lost the audio link, Graham.
How are we doing now?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, so let's talk about something that people know a lot about. Elon Musk's Neuralink. It got FDA approved last month for human trials, despite the fact that there are 3 active investigations into it. One of them relates to the illegal transport of monkey brain pathogens.
Oh.
The second relates to the abuse of the monkeys, sheep, and pigs, unnecessary pain and suffering in the experimentation on and unnecessary death of the subjects due to a wish to accelerate the program.
Wow.
And the third is a conflict of interest on a financial conflict of interest on the Ethics and Oversight Committee, which makes sure in a self-regulated way to keep a check on what it is that they're doing with Neuralink.
This does probably also tie in with what Robert Malone is calling fifth generation warfare.
Yes, so that's exactly what it ties into. If you want to call it for what it is, in the CCP, it's called the 3 warfares doctrine. In the Russian Federation, it's called linear warfare, and in the US, it's called hybrid warfare. It's asymmetrical warfare. It does not seek to act in conventional terms. It seeks to act in unconventional terms by affecting, manipulating, and moving the mood, emotions, and outlook of the population and populaces of both domestic citizens and foreign adversaries. Now, bear in mind this: as a European citizen, you're entertained to that from all three sides.
Yeah. I totally have that feeling in Holland. It's not very much different, but it seems that the frontier or the battleground right now is in Ireland. How is the situation in Ireland right now when it comes to this law? Is there pushback, or is there? I mean, is it gonna happen, or?
Oh yeah, it's already so. To
It's already
understand
happened.
that, well, to understand that, you've got to understand briefly how our parliamentary system works here. We have what's called a bicameral parliamentary system, which is two houses, an upper house and a lower house. The lower house is called Dáil Éireann. It's the only directly and democratically elected house, but it only gets elected once every 4 to 5 years. The upper house is called the Seanad, or the Senate. It is a house where people are placed really by it's based on cronyism. There's a couple of elections that do happen, but they are in places like Trinity College. People will vote for a senator to go from Trinity College and other places. And then there is the position of Uachtar an Éireann, President of Ireland. That's a figurehead position. He only, or the president only, has one power left that affects our civil society, and that is if a bill is given to him for signature, he can refer it to the Supreme Court for a review as to its constitutionality. The president used to have a second power to commute the death penalty under capital punishment to life sentence without parole, but we removed the death penalty several decades ago. So the only function and safety valve the president has is that referral of a bill which he's asked to sign into an act to the Supreme Court for review as to its constitutionality. In the Dáil, the first or the lower house, the more powerful house, there are 5 stages of reviewing a bill. The anti-free speech bill has passed all 5 stages. It's currently at stage 7 in the Seanad and may be moving to stage 8 next week. But the Seanad has no power of veto. So they have 5 stages there, but they're really just a talking shop to massage the egos and give sound for 15 minutes of fame to the various personalities in there who hope one day to be selected by the higher ups in the political party structure for candidacy to become a member of parliament. So they have no power of veto. They can refer elements of it back with recommendations to the Dáil, but no veto. And the president does not have veto either, except where he chooses to refer a bill to the Supreme Court regarding constitutionality. He does not.
So that's basically the last fail-safe. If that doesn't happen, it's true.
He's not going to do it. He's already said he's not going to do it. So it will become law in between the next 6 to 12 weeks. And it already large amounts of NGOs and also sock puppet accounts on Twitter have been busy taking screenshots of posts, getting ready for a tsunami of complaints that their feelings are hurt when this law comes in, and they speak very happily, and they're drooling at the possibility of removing an entire swathe of Irish commentators from the public discourse. But it's not just as simple as that. As you're removed, you will face a criminal sanction, you will get a criminal penalty, and that is the end of you and your possibilities for a job and your possibilities for movement outside of the Schengen area. And it may very well be a position that you won't be allowed to move within the Schengen area either. So this is a horrific authoritarian law, and it is going to become law unless Higgins refers it to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is stacked with people of the same mind. So people ask me, why do I want it to be referred? Well, I don't want it to be just referred. I want people to stand up and actually mark the time when free speech was taken away from the citizens of Ireland, at least in some way for posterity. to show that people just didn't stand and do nothing. But it appears to me that that is what exactly is going to happen. But the reason I want the referral to the Supreme Court, while everybody else thinks, no, let it go into law, and then as people get arrested, we will go with judicial reviews, that's a nonsense. There's 40 different sections in this bill, and the permutations and combinations add up to thousands of different subjective situations. Even if you were successful in your judicial review, if you were, say, arrested over a possession of a picture that somebody felt offended by, it would only amend that particular article of the law and not the entirety of the statute. So really, the referral to the Supreme Court is a delaying mechanism to allow people to get together a set of critical thinkers who can be put forward for election before the government is legally obliged to call one and have in place before March of 2025, because we don't have any options here. We have a one-party system. 91% of our parliamentarians voted, government and opposition, except for 14 independent members of our parliament, for the removal of free speech in this country. If that doesn't speak volumes, then I don't know what does. So there's no alternative but to create a set of people who are critical thinkers, who agree that lying in office is treason and a resignable offence, who agree that if they do not carry out the mandate to which they were given, that they must resign, and who agree that the interests of tightening up our constitution, which was written over 70 years ago, is in the interests of every citizen, because it's being interpreted, because it was never written to cater for the many and numerous ideologues that exist now, who look at it and take advantage of it for their own purposes. And remember this, 38% of the tax taken out comes from 3 United States multinational corporations. 40% of our electricity grid powers US data centers of the web of the tech behemoths. And our data protection commissioner, who is responsible for the data privacy of 600 million Europeans, has in the last decade failed to adjudicate over 96% of the complaints. And our own government, with Apple, has fought the European Union not to take 15 billion of illegal political state aid to Apple, which the Irish politicians gave it over the last 7 years, and which the European Union found to be illegal, and are now referring Ireland to the European Court for not complying with the order to take 15 billion of tax owed to the Irish taxpayer. While the government runs a massive surplus, we have homelessness at scale of our own people, an absolutely unfit for purpose, decades-long healthcare system that's dysfunctional, a decades-long unfit for purpose transport system, failure at every level of our healthcare for the elderly, failure at every level for our assistance of people with special needs, speech impediments, or any other help, such as autistic people with autism. And yet, since 2020, over 250,000 people have been brought into this country, a very large percentage of them without passport or documentation. This government has removed the concept of border control. They are now placing people in all around Ireland, males of various nationalities, not mentioning the 135,000.
Lost you again, Graham. You there? Yes.
Different languages, which said, Ireland, we will give you a house and we will give you money. And to Ireland they have come.
Yeah, that is that picture that you paint is very recognizable all over Europe, but it seems that it's really egregious in Ireland. You paint a really bleak picture there, Graham. So basically, you're not expecting to win, but you're expecting for posterity to log it in, so that people can look back where it went wrong, horribly wrong. So if Ireland is lost already, So what does that mean for yourself, and what does that mean for the rest of Europe, and how can people help you and resist this madness?
I don't believe Ireland is lost. I believe that the bill will go into law because none of the safety valves will do otherwise. I expect to be arrested in the first wave of arrests and tried under the anti-free speech bill, and I am perfectly happy for them to do that to me, because from a young age there was one thing I could not abide, which was a bully. Um, for a brief time in school, I was bullied. This is why it's important for children to be in society and not protected from. I mean, by that I mean, when I say protected from society, they clearly need to be protected from a society that seeks to hypersexualize them and seeks to put many people in the country who consider the age of consent to be 10 years of age, and a society where our journalists have agreed with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees that they will not report the rapes, murders, beheadings, and child abuse that has taken place at the hands of unvetted migrants in this country, because they feel that that might be hate speech. A recent example being the rape of an 11-year-old boy in Galway, and the defence to that rape is that it was a sexual emergency. In Sligo, two gay men were beheaded by a Syrian, and a third was blinded because, as a gay Syrian, he was sent back to Syria to a madrasa to be reprogrammed and was sent back to wage jihad as his penance on gay men. He had a hit list of 25 people. That again was not reported. A Zimbabwean triple murderer has been in this country for a year with the knowledge of our government, has brought his wife and children. He is now not going to be deported because it's considered to be cruel or unusual punishment that he might have to face justice for the triple murders he created in Zimbabwe. There are multiple wanted terrorists from PKK, YPG, YPJ, and other outfits that have Interpol red notices out on them that are and have been identified on the streets of our cities. Ireland is not lost. When Padraig Pearse and the 1,600 men and women of 1916 took on the British Empire for 1 week and were executed for it in Kilmainham jail, they did not know that people would take up that mantle, and 6 years later the British Empire would be gone from Ireland. When Robert Emmet stood on the gibbet and said that no man will write my epitaph until Ireland is free again, and was hung, drawn, and quartered, he did not know that the Irish Republican Brotherhood and that other men in the Fenian Brotherhood, the IRB, and the old Irish Republican Army would take up the mantle. When the men in 1798 lost on Vinegar Hill and were murdered, executed, and transported in their tens of thousands to Australia, Tasmania, and New Zealand, they didn't know either. When the Grand Order of Hibernia united the Catholic and Protestant people of this country in order, in an enlightened period, to share our joint destiny, Ulster Scots, Planters, and Southern Native Irish, in unity in a sovereign nation under our own control, they did not know. When people under monarchies in 1913 as peasants and serfs pre-World War I were under the jackboot of kings, queens, princes and princesses, dukes, tsars and whatnot, they didn't know. 5 years later, none of them existed. When Jews in 1939 Nazi Germany looked into their future, they never thought that 6 years later that horrific regime would be gone. When Stalin was doing his purges, they did not realize that 50 years later there would be no such thing as the USSR. And Pol Pot in Cambodia with his killing fields, where I have been in the war. If people like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and others said they had been defeated in the face of an essentially and implacably possible to defeat enemy, we would not have any of the freedoms that we have today.
True.
So I'm not comparing myself to any of those people at all. What I'm trying to say is that a war is won through a series of battles. It's the way you win a war in the way you address each battle. To quote Sun Tzu, if you know yourself and you know your opponent, you need not fear the outcome of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not your opponent, for every victory you will have a defeat. And if you neither know yourself nor your opponent, you will lose every battle. I do believe that the Irish people can find a solution to this problem. I do believe that it is an unnatural set of ideologies that are being propagated globally at present. And by unnatural, I mean counter-human, transhumanism. And nature abhors a vacuum, but it also abhors an anomaly. And an anomaly this is, we are in horrific, and we will be put back into equilibrium with nature by nature, whether we like it or not.
So this, well, you raised so many topics. So this might be an interesting place to sort of put in, our view is we see this sort of battle that has been going on for a long time between centralization and decentralization. And centralization is basically turning the world into a giant anthill and reducing people to cogs in the machine. And it's basically using all the technology, which is, technology inherently centralizes most of the time because of various issues. I think Santa Fe did a very interesting video on that, why technology tends to centralize, because it takes the know-how of people, and the people have to work together in groups, and so the capital goes to one place, but the people also have to go to one place. So it's very difficult to spread the information. The information spreading out is not so difficult, but to get the people with the know-how to also go to different places. And so basically, there's also an inherent tendency of technology to centralize, apart from the power that it gives a minority over a majority. But that's coming to a head, right? So people in power probably saw this moment coming, that they had to choose either behave and let natural forces take hold and redistribute power again, like it naturally happens, or skip ahead and take all the power for themselves and escape. It's basically a escape out of jail card forever, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well.
yeah, go on.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
No. Please finish.
Yeah. So the way Bitcoin Live sees it is that we have a moral duty to resist that tendency to centralization, and that's why we really focus on decentralization, and decentralization also in the sense of spreading power out, right? I mean, a democracy, a working democracy, is also a form of decentralization, where you spread the power into different houses and different groups. But also technology itself can also be used as a force of decentralization. So, which sort of brings us to a side topic. I know you're probably very skeptical about it because you already mentioned that Web3 and all that. So what is your view on crypto and Bitcoin? And do you see any role in it in a positive way, or is it merely negative?
Well, let me just answer the question first of all regarding the difference between positivity and negativity, and the difference between the Oppenheimer effect and ethics. In the Manhattan Project, in a wartime context, technologists, in their love of their discipline, sought to create a nuclear weapon. They didn't do it particularly based on their writings afterwards, because of their wish to reduce to ions a large group of Japanese civilians. They did it because they were interested in this idea of nuclear fission. And in the Trinity Project, they delivered the US military a nuclear weapon, which they proceeded to drop on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the years following the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer quoted from the Bhagavad Gita's that I am death, I have become the destroyer of worlds. Because on reflection, after the accomplishment of his scientific ambitions, he realized he had handed humanity, for the first time in our known history, the ability to destroy itself completely. And as an atheist, he could find no comfort in any other belief system other than the fact that he regretted what he thought was the magnus opus of his scientific career. So let's separate doomerism, fear, and negativity, which I constantly get accused of. I have a bi-weekly spot on Mario Space AI Town Hall on Tuesday and Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern.
We'll link that.
And on the panel of 11, I am the only one, along with Suleiman Ahmed. But Sully is quieter these days. That might have something to do with the fact that IBC, as an incubator which is looking for AI projects to do Shark Tank pitches to Mario. But nonetheless, I constantly get accused of negativity, being afraid of AI, being afraid of progress, being a Luddite, being a doomer, being a black pillar, and so on. That's not true. If you look at my bio, it says AI ethics and neuroethics.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty with leaving the domain of technology to technologists was very, very easily shown when it wasn't an existential threat to people, in the way that software greed allowed the release of software that was unfit for purpose, that allowed backdoor exploits under the Vault 7 program of the NSA, that allowed weaponized backdoor and zero-day exploits through people like the NSO group and the Pegasus spyware platform, that allowed the invasion of privacy and changed people's concept of privacy from a time where if somebody opened your letter that came through the post box, there would be an argument, to a time where people, normal people, not only fans, but moneymakers, but normal people press release the most intimate moments of their lives. Yep. It's the devolution of the individual and their privacy to the press releasing of every aspect of their life. So let's trace what ethics means versus what people call Luddite and doomerism, fear and negativity. But ethics asks questions that people who want to make profits don't want to hear, that shareholders who get dividend stocks from technology companies don't want to hear, because we have conflated the difference between the creation of wealth and freedom. In some way, people think wealthy is the same as being free. So before we get into decentralization as a concept, and Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and all the other shiny new toys that everybody is playing with these days, let's just for once put a nail in the coffin of the idea that ethics is doomerism, negativity, fear, or blackpilling. It is the 10th man rule. The 10th man rule, where if 9 people agree on something in a 10-person room, the 10th person is obliged to disagree in order to make sure that everybody is not making a mistake. It's very well popularized in World War Z. Brad Pitt's movie, and the Israeli response in that movie to the Zeke virus. So it's also interesting that everything that happens is always in advance. If you check out The Last of Us, you will see a situation where the creation of conditions and sentience within Mikey and within the psilocybin caused it to achieve a type of sentience that then became invasive to humanity. People aren't aware that the biggest living organisms on our planet and our perception of our own cognition and intelligence is based on a hubris that because we are the most violent and because we are top of the food chain, that somehow we are also the most intelligent and sentient beings on this. That is the pride of man that says that, not the reality. The current trajectory of thinking in a transhumanism and a neoconservative landscape is that, as David Bowie said, when Nietzsche declared that God is dead and that man held him, and that as God, man could create nothing but death and destruction, left the horrific notion of how would man the void that he had himself by murdering God. And not God in the Catholic, Protestant, or any other sense, in people, of the idea of sovereignty, autonomy, and control of their own emotions. And that in a landscape where every dollar is running for their 15 minutes of fame and worship of the personality, technologists must not be allowed just in the context of software that trying to codify or attempt to codify things, thinkers that we know in our oral history from Sumeria to Mesopotamia, Greece and Egypt, that no one has been able to codify. And that is, what is the essence of being human? What is love? Is fear? What is the soul? What is your subconscious? What is your superconscious? Are we connected with one part of a very large ecosystem? How is nature a larger ecosystem? The concept of infinity. And in infinity, you'll hear Musk talk about we live in a simulation. That's because of Maslow's golden hammer theory, which is give somebody a hammer and the world is full of nails. He uses the word simulation because it's a technology. If anybody understands the concept of infinity, they will appreciate that we live in one and infinite numbers of iterations in an infinite universe. But we're in a digital age where everybody wants to be a technologist. You use the idea of a matrix.
Yeah. Yeah,
So to
I
wrap that up
prefer
quickly, I really want
Donald Hoffman. He has this the case against reality, which I find very interesting idea. And one of the points that he makes, it's not like, when they talk about simulation, people think about the Sims or something, or the Matrix. But what he's arguing is actually that it is beyond our comprehension entirely, right? He's basically more in a classical tradition that everything is consciousness, and consciousness reigns supreme. And what is happening right now is we're trying to make people resonate with the machine, right? So instead of resonating with other consciousness around us and with the universe, which is basically top to down consciousness, according to him, of course. But he's, like I said, he's in line of a very ancient tradition, going back to the Greeks and basically also the Middle Ages, and you could say David Hume and many others have argued the same thing. That we are doing the wrong thing. We're resonating with our machines and with technology itself, and we're forgetting who we are, and that we're actually have to connect with nature and each other to be whole, right?
Exactly. And that brings us back to cover more, it's a good segue to cover an earlier question more completely, which is, there's a thing called the 9 meals rule, which is that in the absence of 9 meals in a row, society will devolve to a Stone Age existence. Not because people become cavemen again, but because people's primordial instinct and the amygdala part of their brain and their survival instinct will cause people to devolve from the societal structures in the absence of 3 days of food. Now, also bear in mind that complexity is not order, it is chaos.
Yeah.
And complexity is not structure, it is fragility. And it goes without saying that most people on this planet are completely unaware of the fact that regardless of how sophisticated we think we are, one misplaced major solar flare while we pass through it, unfortunately, on our orbit, we're just shorting the transformers across maybe, let's say, North America and Europe, will completely destroy the societies. That has precedent in the early noughties in northern Canada, in Alberta.
Yeah.
So when you have transformers incapable, just transformers, not an electromagnetic pulse, not a gamma burst off some, well, a gamma burst would just get rid of us completely, but just an unfortunately powerful plasma ejector from coronal ejection from the sun, just shorting the transformers in the top of the poles that deliver the electricity to everybody. That's the end of the discussion around the digital age and our transhumanist overlords. That's the end of it. It's done, because estimates are that it would take 50 years to manufacture and replace the transformers, just the transformers. Say it did no damage to any computer.
Yeah, I think you're gone. Yeah, we lost your audio feed. Can you hear me, Graham?
Any good now?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So I don't know what you heard last, but let's stop pretending that in some way we're not. And also your point about vibrations and frequencies. Tesla, not the car, but the man, and a lot of thinking which went alongside Tesla and which was taken by other people and hidden, um, has taken out a whole domain of knowledge from the curriculum. Remember also that it only takes 2 generations for people to forget.
Yeah.
Our academia does not recognize oral traditions. They will only recognize what has been left in writing, and therefore they consider the Sumerian and the cities of Ur and Akkad in Sumer and the clay tablets they left around in their tens of thousands to be the cradle of civilization. Yet they ignore the fact that Göbekli Tepe and other monuments with masonry skills and symbology far above the capacity of what they accuse of being day-to-day, hand-to-mouth hunter-gatherers who somehow took time out of their day to create massive monuments of feats of engineering with complex symbology and then cover them in mounds, somehow dovetails with this idea that they were all knuckle-dragging hunter-gatherers. We do not recognize the oral tradition. J.R.R. Tolkien said it at the start of Lord of the Rings. History turns to myth or legend and then turns to myth. And also bear this in mind, J.R.R. Tolkien, Aldous Huxley, C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, and many of the writers of the 20s, 30s and 40s, monuments of English literature are on the RICU, which is the British government's prevent program's list of content to be banned because it is potentially radicalizing. Now, when you consider that, then that dovetails quite neatly with the concept of authoritarianism, the reduction of all previous human thought around the subject of sovereignty, agency, and in that book, Lord of the Rings, like the Lion King, he talks about it's a parable for the Jungian concept of the society within and the dark edges and the danger without, and how we create archetypes within our societies, such as the healer, the hero, and so on, the divine feminine, in order to deal with these particular issues. They are devolving society to individualism. Jordan Peterson talks about the 12 steps to individualism as empowerment. It's the direct opposite. For in individualism, any tyranny can exist because people consider themselves individuals and will not come together as communities to face a common foe.
Well, you could make a difference between 2 types of individualism, right? The right type, which John Stuart Mills, for example, stood for, and what we got today, which is basically consumerism, which is masquerading as individualism. That is sort of people just going egotistical and self-centered and, oblivious to what's around them. But if you're like a true individual, basically you have to first dislodge yourself from groupthink and think for yourself and be self-reliant, taking care of business yourself instead of letting somebody else do it or letting somebody else think for you, and then come together as individuals in a collective. And not a collective is probably the wrong word here, but as a group of individuals.
I agree completely, and I thank you for the clarification. Peterson's idea of individualism is exactly as you've defined. Individualism in the concept of individual anarchic thought, which the minute people hear anarchy, they think, oh my God.
Yeah.
But what it is in its truest form is a critical thinker who makes every decision in the domain of enlightened self-interest, which is what is good for me and what is also good for all of my community.
Yeah.
And in the domain of critical thinkers who are capable of making decisions by being informed by fact, not opinion, they are in a position to make decisions based on enlightened self-interest. People have lost the concept of enlightened self-interest by the devolvement to narcissism, subclinical psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And even as a result of that, the dark triad is no longer the most feared psychopathic, sociopathic personality within society, but rather the dark empath, which contains the essential traits of some subclinical narcissism, subclinical psychopathy. I hate to use the word Machiavellianism because Machiavelli was a great writer and he wrote that book, The Prince, when he had been thrown out of the Medici palace and had been exiled, and he was very bitter. But let's call it the ends justify the means instead of Machiavellianism. But that also travels in the dark empath with a very, very keen sense of the emotions and the cues and the emotion and the body language of other people. In other words, it travels with the ability to be a grand manipulator. And through the societal changes in the last 30 years, that particular type of character trait has been brought to the fore and is possessed among many of the leaders in our political and large business corporations today. And that is the problem also. The concentration of power in a set of people who over the last 15 years have demonstrably and provably shown their willingness to abuse power, their willingness to do surveillance capitalism, their willingness to do mass surveillance and collusion with the alphabet agencies globally, their willingness to deplatform anybody who does not agree with the narrative that they are piping, the ability to use walled gardens and gated silos in order to stop people having the ownership of their own data, the unauthorized monetization of people's data, the unauthorized profiling of people in order to understand their political, sexual, gender, and ethnic views to supply to governments, in order, in the first case, to manipulate elections, and the second case, to leverage them into compliance. This is Mark Zuckerberg, this is Jeff Bezos, this is Elon Musk, this is all of the people who preside over the tech behemoths who are currently busy trying to move their hegemony from Web 2 tyranny into Web 3. Blockchain does not exist. It exists in name only. Cryptocurrencies are a nonsense, for you cannot have an economy that operates off a currency that at once is a volatile, manipulated, traded security and somehow also acts as a fixed price mechanism for merchants to price goods and services by consumers within an economy. People will say that's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And then they'll say, what about Satoshi? Well, 75% of your 20 million BTC coins are locked up by BlackRock and others. 25% is liquid and manipulated at scale. And you've got people telling people to take, or that it's a store of wealth. It is a store of wealth if you're able to allow your store of your life savings fall from $67,000 to $22,000 or $16,000 in 3 months and then wait a decade for it to recover. While nonsense 20-year-olds wander around Twitter spaces telling impressionable people who think that they're trustworthy to empty their bank accounts before CBDCs, that is central bank digital currencies, programmed to be unfair because the Fed Infinity printer has run out of cotton and useless ink and is enjoying a 33 trillion deficit that no eternal amount of warfare under the military industrial complex will fix. So like FDR in 1933 and 34 under the Gold Reserve Act, they have to, with the sway of a pen, write off that by creating CBDCs. And they will roll them out, first of all, through their military payment systems, their civil service payment systems. And then with the introduction of universal basic income, you won't get your bribe to have your chip in your skin unless you take it and unless you accept CBDCs. The problem with people is that their attention span and the units of attention have devolved to almost zero, that people are defined in society as units of consumption, and that they are playing along with the narrative. And I'm sure there's many people are sitting listening to this or will and say the arrogance of that man. I'm not speaking about myself saying this. This is observation and it is provably fact, as opposed to the opinion that suggests that blockchain, Web3 and AI trained by markedly biased data, a Web2 environment filled with black propaganda, manipulated misinformation and disinformation, false narrative, rewritten books should act as the training data set for AI and somehow not create a bias. A system where OpenAI, an allegedly not-for-profit organization, is now owned by Microsoft, where people anthropomorphize a dumb as a doorpost large language model that can never be sentient to being sentient, because people do that. They anthropomorphize and give human characteristics to inanimate objects because people are wired like monkeys. We must associate ourselves, like Tom Hanks did with the football, with Wilson, in order to give something that we like, human qualities. And the powers that be know how to play on that. And when you look at militarized neuropharmacology and militarized neurostimulation and at brain-computer interfaces, people might think science fiction. But no, 750 million DNA-altered flying needles were introduced into Florida during the events that happened from 2020 to 2021. That's unelective virus injection. It has been provably shown that the vaccines, and anybody who knew anything about medicine knew that the mean time to the creation of a vaccine is 7 to 20 years, not 7 months.
Yeah.
But in the war game of that particular event, they were wargaming how many people would follow in the dystopian queue to fight each other, to be injected with a substance. And they were drooling when they saw 96% of Western democracies do it. Because the greatest thing you can do with fear is manipulate. And politicians after World War II realized, after they'd finished with their social parachutes, that they couldn't hang on to power just on the promise of a pension and a house. So how do you hang on to power without being looking like a tyrant? You create the power of nightmares, the power of things that they will protect you from, perceived fears. And Charles Strauss in the United States on neo-Straussian conservatism, aka Rumsfeld and Cheney of the Nixon White House and then advisors to Bush II for Iraq Part II, and the parallel development by Saeed Qutb of the Al-Qaeda concept that the West was decadent and that democracy is a cannibalistic system that allowed and was only possible in a capitalistic, cannibalistic society that devoured itself, was not suitable for Arab nations. And rightly so. It isn't suitable for Arab nations. Because if you listen to Kissinger, Hoffenloch, and Schmidt on their trustworthy AI video recently, they make repeated claims that humanity only began to exist during the Renaissance, or to reason during the Renaissance. They make repeated claims that all artificial intelligence must be based off Western values. They ignore the concepts of absolute truth, the component parts of complex truth, being normative, subjective, and objective, and the very, very important role of relativism within our societies. That is, relativism in regional views on politics, in regional views on gender, religion, and other matters. And that's why technologists don't want to hear about ethics, because in order to do that, they'd have to hire teams 10 times the size of their software teams in the form of social scientists, inexact social sciences like economics, philosophy, psychiatry, psychology, and could be compelled to follow ethically aligned design in the creation of artificial and autonomous systems. And they're not willing to do that. And why? Because they want to release their software and they want to make money. And they do not care if that presents an existential threat.
Well, and in that regard, it's very interesting also that they actually fire ethicists, AI ethicists, and also that the top leading thinkers in the field are actually exiting in order to warn us all about things going terribly wrong.
Well, I'm here today speaking to you for now over 2 hours. I spend hours and hours every day on spaces. I have invested tens of thousands in myself in degrees, in 35 years of practical experience. I've been in 113 countries. I have operated in the domains of the defense, entertainment, media, financial services sectors. I have met and lived with cultures that I've lived in Cambodia, in Benelux, in Spain, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. I have seen that common in all humanity is the wish to live in peace, to have a roof over your head, to have a future for your children. And I hear capitalists from software companies protecting their investments, saying that ChatGPT and AI will create more jobs. Tell that to the Indians and the Egyptians and all the call center operatives that ChatGPT is going to put out of a job in another year or so, because it's a mimic for conversational, dumb, narrow AI, which will completely disintermediate the call center industry.
I agree. Yeah.
And they, it's nonsense to suggest that they and the wage, the slave wage that they're paid, which supports their family, will somehow, as was nonsensically suggested to me by some 10-year-old on a space, that they'll go out and be empowered by AI to create a startup and somehow attract capital and become millionaires overnight. You see, this is the problem with society. People sit behind screens, never leave their state or their town, but have extremely strongly held views about things they know nothing about. Yet they program into their code and are confident in their own Dunning-Kruger that they are an expert in something that they know nothing of.
So, two questions. The first one is, why do you call yourself Crypto Palantir? Is there hope for crypto? And the second one is how do people fight this? How should people organize
There
themselves?
is a hope. Again, like there is hope for Ireland, there is a hope for I call it's crypto as in cryptography, not cryptocurrency. And Palantir are the all-seeing stones from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which came from a time that they, in the first age of Earth, that they didn't remember, and it was only handed down through oral tradition in the books, in the Silmarillion, and so on. It's not Palantir Technologies, Peter Thiel's predictive policing
No.
platform. So it's cryptocurrency or cryptography, because I was a vet of the 10-year encryption wars where we tried to secure emails and messaging platforms. Um, I can talk about that some other time. And also Palantir, because the all-seeing eyes were away. A super conscious method of being able to see through a physical object in nature somewhere else. And I thought it was a good analogy for what I tried to, for my thinking. The future for cryptocurrency, I've spent $3 million on a project since 2016, which is at the intersection of Web3, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. And no matter what way I slice and dice it, much to the chagrin of the people, I have no loans on it. I took no offers of investment, and I got lots. I did not release it as an NFT project because I couldn't see how it was an NFT project. It is a passion project now, and it's based on the Penrose tabula rasa theory. We do not need to rush and give existing holders of data like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DeviantArt, and DreamUp, who are the subject of a Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedown notice in SoCal since the early part of this year, which, if successful, means that the training data sets that they provided in the 6 billion images that are used for AI tools to assist artists to create their art, which is also the art that is used to underpin NFT projects, if the trickle-down effect of that is punitive damages, then that will result in the destruction of all of the exchanges that currently sell that art, and all of the projects that currently use that art as NFTs to front their projects. Have a think about that. One ruling on copyright
Yeah.
infringement will have those 4 companies pay massive fines, but will also have the people who built tools on top of them, and potentially the consumers of those tools, also be in breach of copyright and be subject to fines. But if they're not subject to fines, they'll be subject to takedown notices. So all that art that has been bought, all those projects that have been subscribed to, all those NFTs that are being traded will be stranded, as the exchanges, not the projects, will be given the takedown. Magic Eden and OpenSea will be given the takedown notices, and suddenly it'd be no longer possible to trade in those particular images. So is there a solution? Yes, there is. Tabula rasa is borrowed from René Descartes. It's called a clean slate. For once, can we stop rushing headlong into something and create our own unbiased set of data in a flat infrastructure where the currency only has an on-ramp and not an off-ramp, and is based and pegged to a structure which I will not divulge here because it's intellectual property and patented, or trying to be patented, and will operate within a plus or minus 5% inflation and deflationary range in order to allow people to exist in a Web3 economy, while they also exist in a Web2 economy, and while they also exist in an IRL economy. But it will also allow what is called the interconnection of the sensory, emotive, and geospatial web, so that people can actually find the source of truth of data without having to wonder whether it's the truth they're being told. And that's done through the concept, as I call it, of the Penrose sensory device network of trusted devices. And I could speak, I'm not shelling a project here because I'm not going to make any money out of it. It's going to
Yeah.
be open source. And by open source, that doesn't mean it's a saving grace, because there's many open source projects that are egregious impositions on privacy. But so yeah, there is hope for blockchain, there is hope for Web3, there is hope for AI, and there's hope for Ireland, and there's hope for free speech, and there's hope for everything. I have eternal hope in the goodness of humanity and in the prevalence of nature over unnatural things. But I'm an ethicist, and it is therefore my job to ask the 10th man questions, and I don't and will not apologize for
No,
that.
and we should celebrate people like yourself. I mean, I'm all for different views and different opinions, and also the truth, or at least getting the truth out there and getting near it, because it's usually an abstract idea anyway. But together we can reach the truth, right? Or at least approach it. And I think hearing you talk and the passion that you show and the knowledge and the background that you have, that gives me hope. And I always say about hope, it's the one asset they can't take away, right? You can only give it away or lose it. But as long as you keep hold of it, you know, there is a way forward for everybody. And I want to thank you for doing this interview. It was a really tour de force. I learned a ton, and I can't wait to have you back on. And yeah, and I hope Ireland will stand up and not take this. And I hope the whole of Europe and the entire world actually will, yeah, show solidarity and push this back, this madness.
Well, Niklas, I will say this. I am very, very grateful to you and your colleagues for this opportunity. Um, I I am very thankful and I'm humbled by the fact that you think my words are good enough for your audience. But after 2 hours of talking truth, it is also important to touch on that concept of hope and to leave people with positivity after giving, the facts on things. The thing is that no matter where people go, there is inherent goodness in people. There is inherent positivity, and the tendency, despite the images put by us by mainstream media, is the reality is that people are good, and that people and their choices are their choices as long as they're illegal. It is nobody's business to interfere in the life choices of anybody else, and it is nobody's right to be dogmatic. It is not a subscribe to world peace and why can't we all get on together, but it is this. I'm sitting here, and this is why I really mourn the no video, in the middle of a huge green space. All around me, there's tall grass and old growth trees, oak, chestnut, walnut. There's a light breeze blowing, and it's a sunny day. And I'm sitting on a chair, and I am grounding my feet on the grass. And at the end of the day, no artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, or XR is going to replace human to human contact and the connection of people with each other and each other with nature. And that is where people who don't perceive that will fail, because goodness, truth, light, peace, and hope can never be conquered, because they're an inherent part of the divine that can never be reduced to numbers.
True. And I would like to add to that that technology as a tool to be used by somebody who knows how to use it is fine, but to be used by technology is where it goes wrong.
Yes, and I think when I speak with when we speak together, Niklas, and with the other people I speak with, there is a large and growing number of really, really good people with really good motives, with integrity, with honor, with loyalty, who understand justice at the natural law level, not at the fake statute level. And there is more and more people drawn to this idea that we are connected in some unknown way to each other. And it's not mysticism, it is just the beauty of a nature we don't perceive and a reality that we parse out a large amount of. But I do believe, and I have complete faith, despite my monologues about ethics, I have complete faith that we will prevail, and that goodness will prevail, because one match lights up an eternity of darkness.
Yes, I like that idea. And Sauron will be defeated in the end, right?
Absolutely, and I come back to Lord of the Rings unapologetically, and
It's a classic.
people can say what they like. I have watched those movies innumerable times. The Hobbit also not as much as I love. My favorite is The Fellowship, then The Return of the King, and then The Two Towers. But The Fellowship,
then,
the extended version,
yeah,
especially the piece where Gandalf is pulling up at the start, and the wonderful Shire. I mean, it's just a nice movie. It makes your heart feel warm,
yeah,
and it just connects you with what's important, which is community and love for each other. And I think that's, in Jim Morrison and John Lennon are my two greatest
imagine.
heroes. I won't say anything from Jim but yeah, but the words that I had the greatest honor of all time is like Sean Ono Lennon gave me a follow on Twitter, and I nearly fainted with joy a few months back. Um, his father is my hero. In Working Class Hero, he wrote a line: "They hurt you when you're young. Instead of they giving you their time, they give you none at all. They despise a fool and they hate you if you're clever." In other words, you can't win anyway with some people,
True, true.
But
Yeah,
a beautiful soul, John, and a beautiful soul, Jim, and also all the members of the 27 Club, Kurt Cobain, and all the others, Janice. They were great people,
they died too young. Yeah, yeah. Some people you shouldn't
They
please.
did, yeah. All the good died too young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, thank you, Graham, for this very enlightening, sometimes kind of scary, but also hopeful message, and for telling people to take responsibility and to start thinking about what's going on. Look at the bigger picture, and I can't wait to do another with you.
Absolutely, and this time I will be on a laptop rather than a mobile, so that we can, so that you can see. Well, that it might be depends on what you like in terms, or depends on what people like. Well, I can see me on my Twitter timeline, but it's much better when you can see a person's facial expressions as they're delivering a message, because it shows they're also, their passion and their upset, and also their views as they travel with their facial expression. So I'm sorry for the problems with video this morning, but it's been a fantastic experience, Nicholas, and thank you very, very much
Thank
for the
you.
platform. I am doing namaste also to you, and yeah, I would say slap well vel but it's not yet bedtime,
No,
and that's Flemish also, as opposed to Dutch.
yeah, it's still afternoon, but I'm. It's not nap time yet. But keep fighting the good fight.
No, no.
And I wish you all the best, and all the people of Ireland and everybody who's listening to this, keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much, Nicholas.